Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is April 5th, 2024. And let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? Let's talk first about the devastating drone strikes last night and today on Russian air bases. It's been confirmed that Ukraine has organized successfully actually 4 different attacks on Russian airfields. So, the most important one that happened last night was in Morozovsk, which is in Rostov Oblast, very close to the Ukrainian border between Russia and Ukraine. And it's a very important airbase because essentially the news indicated that the Russians had 3 squadrons of Su-34s present during the attack last night. Now, based on satellite imagery, it's still very inconclusive what exactly got damaged and destroyed, but the Ukrainians confirmed that at least 6 Russian military aircraft were destroyed and another 8 were damaged as a result of this huge drone swarm that they launched on Morozovsk alone. And pro-Russian Telegram channels mentioned that about 50 to 60 Ukrainian drones were used. Some of them were down by the Russians, but some of them obviously weren't. And the Ukrainians managed to also not only destroying some of these Su-34 bombers, but also killing and injuring close to 220 military personnel that were located in the base. So about 20 of them were either killed or injured in the process. And additionally, we're also talking about Engels 2 airfield, which is a very important airfield for the Russians because they hold a lot of Tu-95 MS strategic bombers. So these are the Cold War era strategic bombers that the Russians have been using. And the Ukrainians confirmed that they were able to damage 3 of them. Additionally, the Yeysk airfield was also attacked and 2 Su-25 aircraft, jet fighters, were destroyed. And also another airfield in Kursk was attacked, and the results of this attack are not yet confirmed. So 4 different attacks, and all of them seem to be successful. And, Ukraine doesn't have the choice right now but to intensify these attacks on Russian airfields because we've noticed an increase of Russian cruise missile attacks on Ukrainian cities the last few weeks. There's a new report that came out today that mentions that unfortunately about 75 to 80% of Ukrainian thermal power plants have been damaged or destroyed by Russia in the last few weeks. Russia started a new campaign of destroying Ukrainian power generation, and this is really impacting, especially if we're talking about the second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv, which is still without power until today. So this really tells you this new terrorist attack campaign that the Russians have started waging against the Ukrainians, and there is an absolute need to destroy these strategic Tu-95 MS bombers. And they're one of the most important targets because they can obviously carry a very large payload, and they can cover large distances far away from Ukrainian air defense systems. So this is why the Russians are still utilizing these very old planes. And their Su-34 bombers, which were present in the Morozovsk military airfield in Rostov last night, are also very important because, as I've said previously, in the last few weeks, the Russians have been intensifying their attacks in Avdiivka and Bakhmut thanks to these Su-34 bombers who were able to essentially drop off very powerful glide bombs, the FAB-500, FAB-1000, FAB-1500, and now the Russians are also producing the FAB-3000. So this kind of number that is associated to the FAB indicates the warhead, which is very, very important, and it's been very hard for the Ukrainians to defend, especially when the Russians launch dozens of these bombs per day. So overall, fantastic strikes by the Ukrainians, and they absolutely need to continue doing this until there's no more Tu-95s, until there's no more Su-34s, Su-25s, Su-24s, and there's a serious drought right now within the Russian Air Force. The Ukrainians have really been successful in the last 2 years in really destroying Russian air capabilities. And in other good news as well, speaking of drones, the Ukrainians have really started investing a lot into drones. And guess why? Because the allies are too worried to provide the actual weapons, such as long-range missiles, necessary to strike Russia. Or even if Ukraine receives them, there's always the strings attached and the messaging that goes behind it that, you know, tells the Ukrainians, just don't use them on Russia, don't use them on these specific targets, right? Ukraine has its hands tied, being told that they can't hit this, and that, whereas Russia can absolutely hit whatever they want, and they basically get, you know, just a slap on the wrist at best. So unfortunately, the Ukrainians have to absolutely rely on themselves, which can be a good thing as well, because you don't want to rely absolutely on your allies that can give up on you any day. So what is positive is that Ukraine has confirmed that they're in possession of super long-range drones. So by the end of the year, of this year, about 10 manufacturers are going to supply the armed forces of Ukraine with drones that have a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. And this pretty much gives Ukraine total control over the sort of western / central part of Russia, which is critical for the Russians because they're relying on their very long distances where they have their airfields, their refineries, to have this sense of security. And as we've seen, the Russians have so many holes in their air defenses in Russia because they're prioritizing, obviously, defending eastern Ukraine right now. And so the Ukrainians have been flying with impunity without any consequence, pretty much. And they've been able to hit Russian oil refineries, plants, key strategic, targets in Russia without really having, without worrying that they might get shut down. So it's excellent to see that now this brand new Ukrainian drone that is called the Sokil 3000 essentially has a range of over 2,500 kilometers, and it can even fly up to 3,300 kilometers. So depending perhaps on some modifications, it can fly even longer, perhaps if they reduce the warhead size. But it is also the 2,500 kilometer range is if it's going to carry 300 kilogram warhead, which is quite significant, very, very significant. It can pretty much destroy and cause a massive destruction of pretty much any refinery or a very large area of destruction, basically. And, I got to give credit to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have really been doing an excellent job since the start of this year in developing a very robust and powerful drone program that is unmatched. Really, the Ukrainians have innovated so much. And, we've been talking, you remember, in February, how the Bayraktars, the Turkish Bayraktars, were helping the Ukrainians. Well, we don't see them flying anymore because the Ukrainians have started developing their own drones, and they don't really need the Bayraktars that much anymore. So that really tells you how quickly the Ukrainians have developed this industry. And I think this is the only industry where the Ukrainians have full control over. It's difficult to build a jet fighter program or a missile program because it involves so many components that Ukraine perhaps isn't able to produce. But drones are readily available. Drones are easy to manufacture. They're cheap, especially if you're building kamikaze drones. And so the Ukrainians are really betting all their efforts on drones because they realize how much of an impact it had and it still has on Ukraine's capability and abilities to defend itself. So this is excellent news, and I cannot wait to see these long-range strike capabilities. We've already seen the Ukrainians being able to fly over 1,100 kilometers to Tatarstan, right, where the Russians build their brand new Shahid drone factory, and the Ukrainians managed to, damage one of these, Tatarstan plants. I don't think it was the plant itself, but it was the dormitory where the workers lived, but still legitimate target. And the very fact that the Ukrainians tested, most likely they were testing, and they successfully tested it, and the explosion itself was quite large. If you guys haven't seen it, you can easily find on Google. That happened 2-3 days ago. And, the Russians are panicking because they realize that the Ukrainians have, these drones now that can fly over 1,000 kilometers. They can actually hit their plants that were supposed to be safe. So this is a very, very important development. And we can only continue encouraging the Ukrainians. And you know how you can encourage, guys? By providing, and donating money and funds into the Ukrainian drone production. There's plenty of fundraisers right now. So your donations are making a huge difference right now. And we need to continue doing that. Now, before I end this video, I want to go over a quick map update with you guys. Very quick, nothing really crazy, but just some important updates. And first, I will go in the area of Liman. So that is just close to Kreminna. And here the Russians, as it was indicated by Deep State, are now trying again to push towards the area of Terne and Zarichne. So this sector is essentially fueled by a small river called the Airbases. And so the Russians are trying to get as close as possible to this river, which is kind of a natural barrier for the Ukrainians. Although this is not a massive river by any means, it's still an obstacle that the Russians need to pass through. And so they're prioritizing right now to get as close as possible to these reservoirs and the Airbases River. So this is one of the sectors where the Russians are attempting to storm, but there was a video last night that indicated that they had a failed assault, and the FPV drones, the Ukrainian FPV drones, were able to decimate this Russian assault around Terne. Additionally, again, we need to talk about Bakhmut. I've told you guys that the Russians are really going to concentrate this spring and summer to capture Chasiv Yar. And part of their strategy is utilizing the Su-34 bombers to drop off these glide bombs at a very dense area, right? Chasiv Yar is an urban city, and so the Russians absolutely need to have this ability to destroy large buildings, and they can only do so with, bombs like the FAB 500, 1000, etc. You can see that the Russians made a small low gain. Basically, they're almost at the entrance of Chasiv Yar. Now, based on what the Ukrainian sources tell us, the Ukrainians have been preparing for this. They have some lines of defense here, and we know, as with Avdiivka, the Russians take forever to take cities, and they absolutely need to go through, so many men, so many resources before they can actually capture cities. So this will be very difficult, especially because we know the Ukrainians now are have started receiving the shells and ammunition promised by Czechia, this initiative that was led by them, and so they will be able, I think, to pull off a much more successful defense of Chasiv Yar compared to, let's say, Avdiivka, which took months for the Russians and 50,000 casualties and hundreds of vehicles before they were able to take Avdiivka. So the same will happen for Chasiv Yar. So this will have to be, and undoubtedly will be, another black hole for the Russians, where they're going to be sucked in for as long as they need to, because they believe that this is the victory they require. So Chasiv Yar is under threat, and the Ukrainians are doing everything possible to defend Chasiv Yar, but also the outskirts of Bakhmut. We already know Klishivka, Andriivka, these gains that the Ukrainians made back in the summer of last year, are being defended by the Ukrainian soldiers. So this is a very delicate and difficult front line right now for the Ukrainians. We have to admit that. And additionally, Avdiivka is another Russian offensive that now they're desperately trying to get out of this sector of Berdichi, Semenivka, Orlivka, Pervomayske. So the Ukrainians are just holding right now the natural obstacle where they have the height, they have the control over the heights overlooking Orlivka, Tonenke, Lastochkine, and Avdiivka. So they absolutely need to hold on to this line. I've already talked to you guys in my last video. Their goal is to get to Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. Right, and part of that strategy is to get to Pokrovsk and kind of, finish this lower half of Donetsk. I don't think it's possible. The Russians have struggled so much for so long, and their gains are so slow, right? The Ukrainians are well prepared at this point. There's no more blitzkriegs, and it's going to take a very long time for the Russians, for us to see any big gains by the Russians. And that is all based on if Ukraine is not receiving the weapons necessary. So we'll see. And the other front line right now is, of course, Robotine. The other update is just the Russians managed to capture a very small field just south of Robotine. This is a very complicated front line for the Ukrainians, right? Because they essentially gained all this territory around Orikhiv, but at the same time now leaves them exposed, since they're no longer defensive, on 3 different sides. So there's the eastern sector, there's the western sector, and the central, where the Russians can essentially push from 3 different directions, which makes it very difficult for a defender to hold on, as we've seen with Avdiivka and other sectors. So we'll see, and we might need to be, we might need to expect, if, again, Ukraine isn't receiving the help, as it was promised by the United States, that they might need to pull out and get back to Orikhiv. But we'll see. Right now, it's very costly for the Russians in this sector, in the Robotine sector, but I wouldn't be surprised based on what I'm seeing right now in the United States and the lack of resolve to help the Ukrainians. With all due respect to my American viewers, it's very, very sad for me to see what's going on right now in the United States. And, I have hope, I still have optimism that this month, this bill that we've all been talking about for months is going to get passed. But we know that, realistically, the longer this drags on for, the less, hope you have, of course. And I think it's a bipartisan issue, right? The fact that there's really been a delay, constant delay in weapon delivery to Ukraine is just not only part of the United States, but just the overall issue with NATO and NATO members and Ukraine allies, that they're always very, very afraid of escalating the situation, as if it hasn't escalated enough, right? The Russians have been utilizing massive bombs, massive cruise missile attacks, terrorist campaigns on Ukraine, right? Like, we've reached the ultimate escalation point, which is war, right? I think everybody's afraid of nuclear weapons, which certainly, is always a possibility. But, we're heading into year, number 3 right now. The Russians have not utilized the nuclear weapons that they were supposed to utilize when they were threatening that if a hit on Crimea, on the Kharkiv Bridge, was to happen, then they're going to use the weapons necessary to retaliate, or any other red lines that the Ukrainians crossed, and nothing happened as a result of that. Just the same good old Russian terrorism continued. So we need to be aware of that and really challenge the Russians as much as we can by telling them that, hey, your bluffing ain't working, and we're a powerful alliance, and we're going to help the Ukrainians win this. Instead, we always have this pendulum swinging, right? Where now the pendulum is against Ukraine because the West is afraid. But when the West isn't afraid, like we saw back in 2022, things were moving. Things were going forward, right? And so I really hope that we get to this mindset of, early 2022, when many countries like the United States, Britain, really just started, providing so much support to Ukraine. And, not that it's not happening right now, right? Of course, the Ukrainians are receiving weapons from far more now from Europe. We have to admit it, that Europe is providing a lot more weapons to Ukraine. And that's only the result because the United States isn't providing that assistance anymore, and the Europeans are realizing that, we need to step in, because what if the United States goes into isolation mode, which is very possible, right? And this is not just something that would be a consequence of Trump being elected, but even now with Biden, he's very reluctant to do, or was reluctant in terms of Ukraine, because right now I think they're being very safe. The Biden administration is not wanting to take any risks. So because they know that they need all the munitions necessary to win, no pun intended, to win the election in November of 2024. So they're treading very carefully. So I think that there's more hope for the Biden administration to, once they get reelected, I hope that they're going to provide the assistance to Ukraine that is necessary. But just, you always see this pendulum swinging, right? And it's never just this clear, direct action and this expectation that we will help Ukraine no matter what. So that's the update for today. Lastly, just one last little update before I finish. Update on the Kharkiv Bridge. A few days ago, I believe it was 2 days ago, Budanov and the Ukrainian intelligence confirmed to us yet again that now there's a more specific deadline for the Ukrainians to destroy the Kharkiv Bridge, which is going to be Q2 at the latest of this year, meaning by the end of the summer, we should be expecting the downfall of this bridge. So I'm expecting some strike, perhaps June, July, as we've seen in the past. Last year was in July, I believe, that the Ukrainians managed to damage part of the Kharkiv Bridge. So we can only wish them success, and I cannot wait to wake up in the morning and see this bridge, this illegal bridge and infrastructure that was built on Ukrainian territory, to be destroyed once and for all. Now, one last thing before I finish as well in regards to this bridge. Of course, the destruction of this bridge is going to be very important. It removes a key critical link for the Russians. But there is confirmation that the Russians have been building a railway line. So they've essentially built a new railway line that now passes through Mariupol and Berdyansk, essentially bypassing this other line that goes through Volnovakha, which is much more dangerous. However, even if this line, will be completed very soon through Berdyansk, which heads into Crimea, which essentially connects Rostov to Crimea directly, this still puts them within range of Ukrainian F-16s and other long-range missiles. So, this is still a much more dangerous road for the Russians. Even if it's railway, it's easier to repair than a bridge. But, the Ukrainians will have much more ability to hit it compared to the Kharkiv Bridge, which is, twice, if not 2.5 times further away from the front line right now. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoy my updates. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel. Please donate your money to the Ukrainian war effort to help the Ukrainians win this against the Russians. Leave me a like, leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!